Introduction: the question that changes everything. What if intelligence is not something you possess, but something you participate in? At first, this may sound like a simple shift in wording. But if you pause and really consider it, it begins to challenge one of the most deeply rooted assumptions about who you are. From an early age, we are taught to think of intelligence as something personal, something that belongs to individuals. We measure it, compare it, and often use it to define our sense of worth. Over time, these measurements become labels, and those labels quietly become identity. We begin to believe that intelligence is something we either have or do not have. But there is something curious about how thinking actually works. If intelligence is entirely yours, then why do your thoughts sometimes surprise you? Why do ideas appear when you are not actively searching for them? And why is it that some of your clearest insights come not when you are trying harder, but when you finally stop trying? There is something about thinking that resists complete control. Consider the moment just before a thought forms. There is no clear beginning, no visible construction, and yet, suddenly, an idea appears, complete, coherent, and ready to be expressed. It arrives without effort, and just as quietly, it fades away. We experience this all the time, and yet we rarely question it. We simply accept it as normal. But what if this everyday experience is pointing to something deeper? What if intelligence is not confined to the mind, but connected to something larger, something that we are not separate from, but part of? Think about how knowledge develops in the world. No single person created language. No individual invented culture. These are not isolated achievements. They are the result of interaction, exchange, and accumulation over time. So perhaps intelligence is not just something inside us. Perhaps it is something that emerges between us. And if that is true, then we must go even further. What if intelligence is not only social, but fundamental? What if it is woven into the structure of reality itself? This is not a conclusion. It is a question that invites you to look again at your thoughts, your experiences, and the way understanding appears in your life. Because this exploration is not about giving you answers. It is about changing how you see the question, not just asking what intelligence is, but asking where it truly comes from, and whether it was ever yours to begin with. Chapter 1: The Illusion of Intelligence. We have been taught to believe that intelligence is something we possess. From an early age, we are placed into systems that attempt to measure it. We are tested, evaluated, and compared. Numbers are assigned. Rankings are created. Over time, these measurements begin to shape how we see ourselves. Some are labeled intelligent, others less so, and gradually, these labels become part of identity. But what if this entire framework is built on a misunderstanding? What if what we call intelligence is not the thing itself, but only a narrow expression of something far more expansive? We often define intelligence through problem-solving, logical reasoning, memory, and speed. These abilities help us succeed in structured environments. But do they truly capture what intelligence is? Consider a calculator. It can perform complex calculations instantly, faster and more accurately than any human. Yet we do not call it intelligent. Why? Because it does not understand what it is doing. It produces answers, but it does not experience meaning. It follows rules, but it does not interpret them. Something essential is missing. So intelligence is not simply about producing correct outcomes. It involves something deeper, something connected to awareness, interpretation, and context. Now consider a different example: a child learning to speak. There is no formal instruction, no equations guiding the process. And yet, language emerges. Sounds become words. Words become meaning. The child learns not through calculation, but through interaction, through listening, imitation, and connection. So where is the intelligence in that process? Is it entirely within the child? Or is it also in the environment, in the relationships and exchanges that shape learning? Now shift your attention to the human body. At this moment, your heart is beating. Your lungs are breathing. Your body is constantly adapting, repairing, and regulating itself without your conscious control. And yet, it happens with remarkable precision. Is this not a form of intelligence? Or have we simply decided that intelligence must look a certain way before we recognize it? Even beyond the human body, we see similar patterns. A forest maintains balance through complex networks of interaction. Trees exchange nutrients. Ecosystems adapt to change. There is no central controller, and yet the system remains organized, responsive, and stable. So we are faced with a deeper question. What if intelligence is not something that belongs only to individuals? What if it emerges wherever systems become complex enough to respond, adapt, and sustain themselves? In that case, what we call individual intelligence may not be the source, but the expression, a localized appearance of something much larger. What if intelligence is not something you have, but something that moves through you? Something that appears in moments of understanding, creativity, and insight, but is not confined to your mind alone. If that is true, then the way we think about intelligence must change. It is no longer a possession. It is a participation. And once you begin to see intelligence in this way, the question shifts. It is no longer about how intelligent you are, but about how you are connected to intelligence itself. Chapter 2. The intelligence between us. If intelligence is not confined to the individual, then where does it exist? One place to begin is in the space between us. We often think of intelligence as something that happens inside the mind, private and personal. But if you look closely at how ideas develop, a different picture appears. Many of the things we rely on every day were not created by a single person. Language, culture, and knowledge are not individual achievements. They are collective constructions. No one invented language alone. It evolved over time, shaped by interaction, correction, and shared experience. Each person contributes a small piece, and over time, something far more complex takes form. So where is the intelligence in language? Is it in any one individual, or in the system itself? Now think about a conversation. You begin with a thought. You express it. The other person responds. Their response changes how you think. You adjust, clarify, expand. The exchange develops a rhythm, sometimes even a direction of its own. And then something happens. An idea emerges that neither of you had at the beginning. It is not entirely yours. It is not entirely theirs. It exists between you. In that moment, intelligence is no longer located inside a single mind. It becomes relational, something that arises through interaction. This is something we experience often, but rarely notice. Think about the last meaningful conversation you had. You likely left with a clearer understanding, not because you solved everything alone, but because the exchange itself produced insight. It is as if intelligence becomes amplified through connection. Now extend this idea. Consider teams. A group working together can solve problems no individual could solve alone. Each person brings a different perspective, and when these perspectives interact, something new emerges. In this sense, intelligence is not just individual ability. It is an emergent property of collaboration. Now take this further. Consider the internet. Millions of people contribute ideas, information, and creativity. Out of this continuous exchange, patterns form. Knowledge evolves. Solutions appear. No single person controls it. And yet, it behaves as if it is learning, as if it is processing information. This raises a powerful question. Is intelligence something we possess, or something we participate in? Because if intelligence can emerge from interaction, then it may not belong to any one individual at all. It may exist in relationships, in communication, in the patterns formed when minds come together. This changes how we see ourselves. We are not isolated thinkers. We are participants in a larger network of understanding. And every time we engage, listen, and share ideas, we contribute to something beyond ourselves. So perhaps intelligence is not something you carry with you. Perhaps it is something you enter into. And if that is true, then intelligence is not limited by the individual. It is expanded by the connections between us. Chapter 3: The Hidden Intelligence of Reality. If intelligence is not limited to individuals and not confined to human interaction, then a deeper question begins to emerge. What if intelligence is not just something that appears in systems, but something built into reality itself? At first, this idea may seem abstract, even strange, because we are used to thinking of intelligence as something that belongs to living beings, tied to brains, awareness, and conscious thought. But when we look closely at the universe, something remarkable becomes difficult to ignore. The universe is structured. It follows patterns. It behaves in ways that are not random, but consistent, predictable, and ordered. Physics describes these patterns. Mathematics gives us a language to understand them. And again, we find that reality operates according to principles that can be studied, expressed, and even anticipated. But here is the question that often goes unnoticed. Why is the universe understandable at all? Why should reality follow laws that the human mind can discover? Why should the structure of the universe be such that it can be translated into equations and models? We don't fully understand this. We simply accept it. But if you pause and reflect, it is deeply mysterious, because it suggests that reality is not just chaotic. It is intelligible. It can be known. And that raises an important possibility. Perhaps intelligence is not something we bring into the universe, but something we encounter within it. Consider how complexity emerges. At the most basic level, there are particles. From particles, atoms form. From atoms, molecules. From molecules, systems. And from systems, life. At each level, new behaviors appear. New forms of organization. New patterns of interaction. And as complexity increases, something else begins to emerge. The capacity to respond, to adapt, to organize, to maintain structure over time. These are not random processes. They follow patterns that can be observed and understood. So we are left with a simple but profound possibility. What if intelligence does not suddenly appear at the level of human consciousness? What if it exists in different forms, at different levels, throughout reality, not as a thinking mind, but as an underlying order, a structure that allows systems to organize, adapt, and evolve? In this sense, intelligence would not be separate from reality. It would be a feature of reality itself, something embedded in the way things are. This does not mean the universe is thinking like a human. It does not suggest a conscious entity directing everything. But it may mean that the universe is structured in such a way that intelligence can emerge naturally. That understanding is not an accident. That patterns are not arbitrary. That there is a coherence to existence that allows complexity, life, and awareness to arise. And if that is true, then intelligence is not rare. It is not limited. It is something far more fundamental. Something that exists beneath everything we see. Something that makes understanding possible in the first place. And perhaps, when we think, when we discover, when we understand, we are not creating intelligence. We are recognizing it. We are participating in something that was already there, quietly present, waiting to be seen. Chapter 4: The Mind as a Gateway. If intelligence is not limited to the individual, and not confined to human interaction, and perhaps even embedded in reality itself, then a new question begins to take shape. What is the role of the human mind in all of this? We are taught to see the mind as the source of intelligence, the place where thoughts are created, decisions are made, and understanding is formed. It feels natural to assume that thinking begins and ends within us. But what if that is only part of the story? What if the mind is not the origin of intelligence, but a gateway to it? Consider a simple analogy. A radio does not create the signal it plays. The music is not generated inside the device. It is transmitted from elsewhere and received when the radio is tuned correctly. The clarity of what you hear depends on the quality of the signal and the precision of the tuning. Now imagine that your mind works in a similar way, not producing intelligence from nothing, but receiving, interpreting, and expressing it. At first, this may seem unfamiliar, but if you reflect on your own experience, it begins to make sense. Think about moments of sudden insight. A problem you could not solve becomes clear. An idea appears fully formed, without effort. A connection reveals itself instantly, as if it had always been there. These moments do not feel like construction. They feel like discovery. If the mind were purely a generator, thinking would be entirely deliberate and predictable. But it is not. Thoughts often arise without effort. Ideas surface when you are not searching for them. Creativity flows more easily when you are relaxed than when you are forcing it. This suggests that the mind is not only creating, it is also receiving. Receiving patterns, receiving connections, receiving meaning. But like any receiver, the quality of what is received depends on its condition. A distracted mind struggles to perceive clearly. Noise interferes with signal. Fragmented attention leads to fragmented thinking. A calm and focused mind, however, becomes more receptive. It begins to notice subtleties in relationships that would otherwise go unseen. So improving your thinking is not only about acquiring more information. It is about refining awareness, learning to observe more carefully, to listen more deeply, to create space for insight to emerge. Because insight does not always come from effort. Often, it comes from clarity, from stillness, from moments when the mind is not overwhelmed. This changes how we approach learning and creativity. Instead of forcing ideas, we create the conditions for them to appear. We shift from control to alignment. We begin to pay attention to how we think, not just what we think. The mind is no longer just a tool for producing answers. It becomes a gateway through which understanding can pass. And as that gateway becomes clearer, intelligence expresses itself more fully through us. This does not remove the need for effort. It refines it. Thinking becomes not only an act of doing, but also an act of receiving. And when you begin to see the mind in this way, something shifts. You are no longer just generating ideas. You are participating in a process of discovery, a connection between your awareness and something much larger. And in that connection, thinking becomes more than problem solving. It becomes a way of seeing. Chapter 5. Living in Alignment. If intelligence is not something you possess, but something you participate in, then the question becomes, how do you live in alignment with it? Understanding an idea is one thing. Living it is something else entirely. If intelligence flows through systems, connection, and awareness, then your role is not simply to produce it, but to relate to it. To position yourself in a way that allows it to move more clearly through your thinking, your decisions, and your actions. This begins with a subtle shift. Instead of asking, how can I become more intelligent? You begin to ask, how can I become more aligned with intelligence? The difference may seem small, but it changes everything. Becoming more intelligent suggests accumulation, more knowledge, more information, more effort. But alignment suggests something different. Clarity, openness, responsiveness. It suggests that intelligence is already present, and your task is to engage with it more effectively. This becomes clear in how you approach problems. The instinct is often to push harder, to analyze more, to force a solution. But this does not always work. Some of the clearest insights come when you step back, when you allow space, when the mind has time to settle. There is a reason clarity often comes during a walk, or in a quiet moment, or when you stop trying so hard. It is not because you stopped thinking. It is because you created the conditions for clearer thinking. Living in alignment means recognizing when to engage and when to release. It means understanding that constant mental activity is not always productive. Sometimes, the most effective way forward is not force, but awareness. This also changes how you learn. Instead of trying to absorb everything, you focus on understanding. You slow down. You ask deeper questions. You allow ideas to unfold. Because intelligence is not just about knowing more. It is about seeing more clearly. And clarity requires attention. It requires presence. It requires patience. The same is true in how you interact with others. If intelligence exists between us, then the quality of interaction matters. Listening becomes more important than speaking. Understanding becomes more valuable than being right. Every interaction becomes an opportunity for insight to grow. Not just within you, but within the connection itself. And perhaps most importantly, this changes how you relate to yourself. You begin to trust the process of thinking. You become less attached to immediate answers and more open to gradual understanding. You realize that not every question needs to be solved instantly. Some insights take time, and in that patience, something deeper develops. A quiet confidence, not in what you know, but in your ability to come to know. So living in alignment with intelligence is not about perfection. It is about creating the conditions for understanding to grow. Through awareness, through connection, through clarity. And when you begin to live in this way, intelligence no longer feels distant. It becomes something you experience, something you move with, not something you own, but something you are always a part of. Conclusion, returning to the question. So we return to where we began. What if intelligence is not something you possess, but something you participate in? At the beginning, this may have sounded like a distant or abstract idea, something philosophical, something interesting, but not necessarily practical. But now, perhaps, it feels a little different, because we have seen that intelligence may not be limited to the individual. It may emerge between people, in conversation, in collaboration, in shared understanding. It may appear within systems, within patterns, within the way things organize and adapt. And perhaps it is even more fundamental than that. Perhaps intelligence is not something added to reality, but something present within it, something that makes understanding possible in the first place. We have also considered that the mind may not be the source of intelligence, but a gateway to it. A way of receiving, interpreting, and expressing something that extends beyond individual thought. And if that is true, then the way we see ourselves begins to change. You are no longer just a thinker trying to generate ideas. You are a participant in a process, a point of connection between your awareness and something larger. This does not mean that you lose control. It means that control is not the full picture, because some of your most meaningful insights have never come from force. They have come from clarity, from stillness, from moments when you were open enough to notice what was already there. So perhaps intelligence is not something you need to chase. Perhaps it is something you need to align with. Something that becomes clearer the more attentive you are, the more present you are, the more willing you are to observe, to listen, and to remain open. And this leads to a different way of thinking about yourself, not as someone who must constantly prove intelligence, but as someone who can participate in it, who can recognize it, who can move with it. So the next time a thought appears, or an idea forms, or a moment of clarity finds you, pause for just a second and ask yourself, did I create this? Or did I encounter it? And if you encountered it, what else might be there, waiting to be seen?